Welcome back to another sci-fi episode, where today we're going to continue to talk about the new retirementality. Again, this is where psychology and finances collide, where I'll be walking you through further examination of how you think, feel, and behave with money as it pertains to your F.A.B retirement. So I came up with an acronym, F.A.B retirement, as explained in the previous episode: financial, affective, and behavioral. The financial means that we need to live on in retirement, but also the affective or emotional means that we need to not only prepare for, but to live a life that is satisfying before retirement so that we can continue to have an emotionally satisfying life after retirement. And then the B, meaning behavioral, those behavioral action steps that must be employed to reach that point of extraction, if you will. As Mitch Anthony puts it, we all have this predetermined number in our head or date of our extraction from the workforce. But we don't have to think of it as a date of extraction from the workforce or from work. We can redefine what work is. I promised that I would give you the history. Mitch Anthony talks about the difference in what a worker was prior to the industrial age. A craftsman before the industrial age. A craftsman was someone who had a way of life, who created. They were able to create their own schedule. They were able to fabricate and create their own designs. But then you had the industrial age where then you just became a worker, which meant you just had an income to live on. No longer having a way of life, but now you're just working to have an income. So retirement was pretty much non-existent in pre-industrial America. Older individuals, as I stated in the last episode, were highly regarded and respected as wise and useful. But due to mass production from the industrial age, they were starting to view employees as cogs in the system and therefore replaceable. And then work became something that was no longer viewed as an enjoyable way of life like a craftsman. It became an income to live on like a worker. So someone who actually helped the retirement definition come about and therefore forced retirement, we can thank Dr. William Osler's speech in 1905 at Johns Hopkins University. He said that any man over 40 was virtually useless to society, and people over 60 were entirely useless and a drain on society. That really rubbed me the wrong way, and I hope it does you as well. But again, that was in 1905. Maybe people could chalk that up to the mortality rate was a little different then. Our life expectancy was not as high as it is today. But then, hey, that got a lot of attention. In 1910, pensions gained traction. And then, as Mitch Anthony put it in 1935, FDR was persuaded to announce the Older Workers Pension Act, which became the Social Security Act. So it picked up steam. And then in 1952, mutual life insurance began to promote retirement through storylines of people drinking martinis and having just a wonderful leisurely life after the kids. People started viewing retirement as a way to check out from work. Because again, work became an income to live on, not a way of life. So I'll have a direct quote here from Mitch Anthony in just a moment, but he talks about how there's this bridge where we can start thinking of retirement more as a bridge rather than an extraction date, rather than an end result, and then the next chapter begins where we go from a continuum where we are today. Again, whether you're 30 years from retirement, this is applicable to you, or 3 years from retirement, or 30 days from retirement, we can look at retirement as a bridge. Here's the direct quote. The metaphor that I believe is more fitting for our age is that of a bridge between full-time work and full-time retirement. The length of the bridge varies from person to person, and the bridge can appear for any length of time and can be entered and exited multiple times in the post-60 years. And there are some of us who want to do the work we do as long as we possibly can, meaning as long as we are healthy and competent, we will be on the bridge, end quote. So I love this. It offers a new line in our quest towards a F.A.B retirement, and that is flexibility. It appears to be a big marker of a successful retirement. So I'll add another letter to my acronym, F.A.B retirement, flexibility, financial, affective, and behavioral. So let's all have a F.A.B retirement together as we read Mitch Anthony's The New Retirementality. And again, no Army endorsement implied. There are several retirement books that are out there, some that will only focus on numbers, some that will only focus on pleasure or leisure, some that will only focus on your affect or emotions, and some that will only focus on the behavioral aspects and what you need to do. But that's why I came up with the F.A.B retirement acronym, and let's pull it all together. The New Retirementality tends to inch towards that, minus the detailed financial education that would come with that. But this is a great place to start. So Mitch Anthony talks about artificial finish lines, and I refer to it lovingly as dragon's breath. And you'll understand why in just a moment. But artificial finish lines are these things that we put into place for ourselves. They're these mental pictures, mental images that we have of when we're going to finish working. And again, with current definitions of retirement, that means my extraction date, my date of retirement on this date in August of 2060, I'm going to be fully retired. That's just an arbitrary date. That's not mine. But that's an artificial finish line. That's not something that we absolutely have to hold ourselves hard and fast to, but we typically do. So he talks about these map makers in ancient times. And if these map makers who were well-traveled and had all this experience with different locations, different areas, and creating these maps, I mean, that was part of their job. But if they did not have a specific location that was visited, or they did not know much about an area, or they were unclear of what bordered the road less traveled, they drew fire-breathing dragons. And I thought, wow, what a great way to bring this home. The fire-breathing dragons were there to scare people from crossing over that border. And it's the same thing with this whole artificial finish line that we give ourselves, or date of extraction, this arbitrary number that we give ourselves, or this use by date that we think is stamped on our backs, because it is the road less traveled. A lot of us are limited in our thinking and psychologically, and this is something that I brought to the attention of not only my clinical patients when I was in clinical therapy, but when also in my current role as a financial therapist, is we all have to get out of that rut of thinking that if then, as Carolyn had discussed in the happiness, mapping out your happiness episode, we have to think about what we are doing in the here and now. If you're 30, 15, or 3 years out from retirement, many of us wouldn't be tyrannized with the thought of quitting or retiring if we were following a vocation. And not just working. We are tempted to quit working and retire so we can do something else. But what would we be doing differently if we listened to that voice in our heads that I'm not happy with this, and this is not going to satisfy, this is burning me out, and why I'm leaning towards wanting to retire early, will it cost you more later in not following that inkling than it would now? And I'm not just talking financially. That's why we have to examine the feelings and the behaviors tied to that financial aspect of retirement. Here's a quote that I really like when he talks about retiring, but not retiring in the sense that you think I'm saying retiring. But imagine this, re-tire. Here's a quote. People in these circumstances need to contemplate the psychologically sobering fact that as they drive themselves in a career they dislike, or worse, despise, they are driving on tires with a slow leak. The ride gets rougher and tougher until they find their aspirations in the ditch and little energy left to begin a new journey. This is what happens when you chase an artificial finish line. I love how he put that. I mean, enough said. So instead of retiring, let's just go ahead and, as they would say in NASCAR, get 4 new fresh tires and keep on trucking on for the next 100,000 miles, and possibly in a different vocation, possibly in a different job. And there's a difference between vocation and job. A vocation is more of a calling. And folks that have found their vocation tend to be happier in the work setting. And I talked about that in the symposium. I love my job. Do I like the additional duties? No, the additional duties do not bring me happiness. But my current job that I was hired to do, where my bread and butter is, that brings me joy, brings me a sense of purpose, brings me a sense of joy that I can't even measure. So it's wonderful if you can find that vocation and not just stumble upon a job with a job just being something that you're paid to do in a set of duties, but something that really is more of a calling and a purpose. And I can't remember who said it, but when you have found your calling or your vocation, you never work another day in your life. It's a good quote. So he says in the adjustment to retirement, it's no longer a one and done. You don't just go from diving in from full-time work to full-time leisure. It's not healthy. He says in a quote, you might think life is full of sunshine and rainbows for retirees, but many go through hell and never talk about it because they are ashamed to tell you that they are an anomaly of the social norm, that retirement is the good life. So there might be something wrong with you. That's why they don't reach out for help. And others would say, you're not doing it right. And then, then they're left to think, well, I guess I am an anomaly. And did you know that it takes 3 to 4 times to leave the workplace, according to Mitch Anthony and the research that he has studied from the Employee Benefits Research Institute? He talks about this RAND study, the unretirement study. It takes people an average of 3 to 4 times to leave. I said that twice for a reason. Because domestic violence survivors, it takes them an average of 7 times to leave. What does that tell you about retirement? Okay, I know that, and I never want to minimize what victims have gone through in domestic violence and never want to have this just as a play on words. This is very serious, I understand. But the reason a lot of times it takes 7 times for a victim to leave a domestic violence situation is maybe they don't have adequate finances to support themselves, or they didn't have the sheltering in place where they wouldn't be found, so feared being found or that violent person harming their children or them or someone they love. There are a lot of reasons, but one of the bigger reasons that they don't leave is because they already know the known. And for a lot of people, what is known is what brings security and safety. I know it doesn't make sense to a lot, but it makes sense to a therapist. But can't you draw the parallels with unretirement? Folks who leave the retirement without a healthy relationship with their own lives and with their own satisfaction are going to be completely disillusioned when they leave. Maybe even having fear attached. And you did know the knowns in work, even though it was stressful, even though it was something I didn't want to do anymore. At least I know what's going to happen on the day-to-day. At least now in a work setting, I know how to feel the 168 hours a week. So it's an interesting study there. So I would encourage you to think about that. It's not to say that you're doing retirement wrong if you do attempt to leave and more than once the retirement or the workforce. But that's the opposite of what he's really wanting to say in this book, is that if you found a purpose, whether it's work that is paid or not paid, you really never stop working. But working in a good sense, working towards something that is purposeful and that brings connection. So he gives this information called LEAN. It's an acronym that he came up with for successful retirement. L meaning looking ahead, test driving and rehearsing your retirement. E is for embarking, doing another practice run, not just with looking ahead, but now a practice run with your time and your money. And I love this because I kind of created another acronym, put a little pep in your step, and I borrowed it from Mitch Anthony because he says, people, experiences, and places. Why not go ahead and experience those? Start practicing with those before retirement. You don't have to wait for retirement to have that pep in your step, to practice new relationships with people, the P, new experiences, the E, and the new places, the other P. And now the A in the LEAN acronym, after the honeymoon. So maintaining the sugar rush, because I mentioned in a previous episode that retirees have this sugar rush of well-being when they do retire, but it usually fizzles out after 6 months. So let's maintain that sugar rush, that high, the dopamine, all the wonderful endorphins and neurochemicals that are released because of something wonderful that you've planned and is meaningful. It'll be a wonderful thing. And then the N standing for negotiating balances between vocation and vacation. I love how he put that in a simple acronym. You are leaning into retirement, not jumping into retirement. Here's another one. He's actually pretty good with his words and his acronyms here. Mitch Anthony talks about your I.R.A, but not the traditional I.R.A, your individual retirement attitude. So we've moved away from our parents' pensions, which was a defined benefit plan. A lot of us are now under the defined contribution or self-directed plan. For federal employee retirement system, for federal employees, this new FERS or retirement that is different from CSRS, the civil service retirement system, we have a three-legged stool where we have part pension and part contribution. It's a mixed plan. And then we also have our Social Security as well, but we don't know what percentage of that Social Security will be available to us. So he talks about how the onus is on us to plan for this retirement. So he put it this way, that for several decades, workers were like passengers on the retirement bus. And today we're being put behind the wheel of our own retirement savings vehicle and told to drive. If you were to put me on a bus, a physical bus, we're not even talking retirement, and said, Olivia, I need you to drive this down this very busy street and get to your destination, I think I'd freak out. I wouldn't want to hurt anybody. I definitely wouldn't want to hurt myself, but I would not have the tools necessary. Because guess what? I've never driven a bus before. And it's the same with you, the audience. You've never retired before. You don't know what to do. Now, there are some ideas, right? And there are some behavioral practices in place that certified financial planners or accredited financial counselors like myself will give you to help you inch towards a successful retirement. But if you weren't taught how to drive a stick shift or a Class A, it's a nightmare, kind of like retirement. And if you weren't financially socialized well and not taught how to budget, save, spend credit responsibly, invest, etc., it is a nightmare. And then you avoid the whole thing and never start driving the darn thing. And I so identified with that paragraph of his about the bus metaphor. But here's what I like about the bus metaphor. A lot of us are now on the defined contribution plan, not the defined benefit plan, where we receive pensions only. Now we do this ourselves. We get to be fully in control. And here's what I like about that. Previously, if you were just on a pension plan or a defined benefit plan, you didn't get to pull over that bus anytime you wanted to. You didn't get to change lanes when you wanted to. You didn't get to have the opportunity to exit when you wanted to. You had that constant lure of the carrot that all I have to do is get to that date, even if I hate my job. Because if I don't, then I'll lose the pension. Guess what? We don't have to do that anymore. Because now we have our 401ks that we can roll into a different plan with a new employer. And yes, I'm even talking to federal employees. If you've done your 10 years and you want to go ahead and do something else, what's holding you back? There's no longer that dangling carrot that says you have to stay so many years just to get a pension. I love that because now I can pull over whenever I want. I can take any exit ramp I want. If I want to shift lanes and do a different type of career plan or a different job, I can do that. And I love that freedom. So here's some reality checks of the modern age, according to Mitch Anthony. Assume that benefit erosion will continue. Assume that you will work longer. Assume you will live longer. That's a good thing. And assume there will be unplanned challenges, both financial and non-financial. And this is not to bring this episode to a negative close. This is just a great reminder of why we're even having this discussion. We can't assume that someone's going to drive our retirement bus for us anymore. We have to do this on our own. We have to be ready for it. Did you know that Americans age 65 plus? In the 1960s, there were 17 million. Today, there are 37 million. By 2030, there will be 70 million. That's 20 to 25% of the population. So it kind of gives you a little sober outlook on what Social Security might look like when you're ready to retire. And listen, we're living longer. Your subjective life expectancy, which actually now they're saying is more accurate when compared to age-related actuarial tables, that's where you consider your own health, your familial history, and your own self-estimate of longevity. Mine is 93 because both my grandmothers lived to 93. And I actually think I could go a little longer because of the advancements in science and health, and also because I had proper nutrition all my life when they didn't. So brain development was better for me. So I think it's just amazing that we can think of all these things. People don't have to define it for us. We can define it for ourselves, including how long we expect to live. Remember, retirement isn't just how much you have to live on, which is important, especially because you don't want to outlive your retirement, but it's also much to live for. So to wrap it all up with the individual retirement attitude, here's what that is. And I quote, "I can no longer assume that any institution has my best interests at heart, and I will assume total responsibility for my fiscal well-being. I will plan on not only living longer, but working longer as well. And I will be highly selective about the work I choose. I will remain flexible in my approach, as I know there will be surprises and challenges in the journey ahead." I love that. You know, Mitch Anthony is not a therapist. He's not a counselor. He's just a guy who has a lot of wisdom to impart. Well sought after speaker, motivator, but it didn't take a degree for him to figure this out. I love how we have the ability to do for ourselves what we once thought other people had to do for us. He quotes Viktor Frankl, where Viktor Frankl, he talks about position and disposition. Position is the situation we find ourselves, and disposition is how we choose to respond. And what I most remember about reading in Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is he talks about the last human freedom and that is the freedom to choose. Between any stimulus and response is the freedom to choose, is the space in between to think about what you want to do before you respond. That's actually what separates us with gray matter in our brains from lower animals. We have prefrontal lobes to do that. And so this is something that we can start doing for ourselves. So here's the new mantra that I'll leave you with for this episode. I will be a driver and not a passenger. I will assume responsibility for my own well-being, financially and otherwise. I will respond instead of despond. I'm going to make the most of the situation I'm in. If I need to go back to work, I'm going to look for work that has social and intellectual benefits. And I will thrive, not just survive. With all the wisdom and experience I've gathered, I know what matters and what doesn't. I will apply that wisdom and direct my efforts in the most meaningful ways possible. Chew on that for a while until our next episode. See you then.